I'm Melina Tsapos, and this is In-Depth Conversations. A recent study conducted here at Lunds University has gained a lot of attention, not only here at home, but also worldwide. It has been picked up by journals such as the Daily Mail, the Times, the Toronto Star, Aftonbladet, Svenska Dagbladet, and even Breitbart, just to mention a few of them. The study looks at how good-looking students perform compared to not so good-looking students. There have been multiple studies that have done this sort of thing before, this kind of studies before, looking at the value of attractiveness, especially in behavioral sciences. We have examples where there's a difference of salary, for example, and other benefits at the workplace. But this particular study, has been praised by many, but also criticized by the students at the university. And it has even been reported to the ethics committee. This has, of course, led to a lot of questions. Since academic freedom has only been in law here in Sweden for the past approximately for a year, some are now wondering if this backlash from this study is infringing on the freedom of inquiry, or if it was a gross negligence from an ethical standpoint. Here to help us reflect and discuss this a bit more in depth, I have no other than the author himself. Welcome to In-Depth Conversation, Adrian Mehic.
Thank you.
So this is I'm very honored to have you here.
Thank you.
It's really a pleasure to be able to ask you these questions in person. Like I said, you've been in a lot of news media lately. So we have a lot of things to talk about, but perhaps we can start by hearing your view, or how this study came about. What was your thoughts about it, and why now? Why this time?
Yeah, sure. I had some data from this student group from a previous project. I thought it was very easy just to extend that to this setting instead. To look at beauty, because we know that beauty, of course, impacts a lot of things in our daily lives. If you're beautiful, you will have higher wages, you're less likely to go to prison, and so on. And there has been a debate in the literature why this is, right? So in the, say in the 90s, 80s, when economists first started to look at this, they wondered, isn't this just due to discrimination? And then, maybe in the early 21st century, there was another group of economists basically that said that this is maybe has to do with productivity, meaning that those who are beautiful are more productive for some reason, and that's why they should also be paid higher wages. So the pandemic is a good setting to study this, because this allows us to actually discriminate between discrimination on one hand and the productivity on the other, because all of a sudden teachers, in this case, could not see the faces of the students, meaning that we could actually control for discrimination in a sense. And this also made it very natural actually to kind of study this environment. And of course it adds to other aspects of the pandemic as well, because the pandemic obviously had a lot of impact on university students. We had online teaching for 1.5 years in Sweden, for instance, and this provides a good source of an exogenous variation in terms of these things.
Yeah, definitely. I think you really seized the golden opportunity with the corona pandemic for this kind of study. So I think you've definitely added an interesting twist to these previous studies that you talk about that were already discussed in the 80s.
Sure.
So that's interesting to hear. And how does this fit in with you and your interests? So why? Yeah. You said you had previous data, but can you expand on that a bit? Maybe?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm generally an applied microeconomist, meaning that I work with individuals and municipalities, firms, and so on that level. In macroeconomics, typically we work on countries, on these big things such as inflation and exchange rates and such. I don't do that. So applied microeconomics generally is quite a wide topic. You have political economy, which is my specialization really, but then you also have questions in health, labor economics, economics of education, of course, other aspects as well, gender and so on. So this is quite a wide area of the literature. So if you're an applied macroeconomist, you can do a lot of things, and I, in this case, specialize in kind of the political economy questions, but also in labor. And this is quite a typical labor economics question: how beauty impacts various outcomes. Basically.
Okay, all right. So it's already a standard kind of question, and you're using this in your dissertation.
Exactly. So I will have at least 3 papers. I have written a few already, and this is supposed to be one of the chapters in the dissertation.
Okay, all right. So then, in that context, I want to ask you a bit about the reactions that you've gotten, because you've gotten a lot of reactions. Like I mentioned, all these newspapers and journalists contacting you. And what I didn't mention, what I found in the research was, places like Uganda, Vietnam, and over 1,000 tweets or tweeters who tweeted about you. So there's been quite a commotion, can you say, about it. And I was wondering about your reaction to that. Like, what do you feel about this? Because on the one hand, you've had positive, like I've just mentioned, all these positive, but some have also reacted, the students that have reacted, have felt like you violated their integrity because using their photographs in the study. So that's been kind of a criticism of your study. But then your supervisors have defended you, as well as Academics' Rights Watch has come to your defense, saying that you haven't committed anything ethically wrong. So I was wondering, what's your feeling to this?
If you talk about the media attention first, that's truly been extraordinary. I mean, I've been probably had calls with around 100 journalists minimum, actually, and that's crazy. And you have New York Times, you have New York Post, and so on, and from all over the world, as you say, Uganda, Turkey, Vietnam. So it's been a lot, and that is actually quite overwhelming, because this is not the first study of its kind. It's not the first study to look at the impact of beauty on grades. Certainly not the first study to look at the impact of beauty on the labor market. And as these reactions have shown, it is definitely not the first study that uses a jury to rate faces. That is a standard procedure in the literature. It's been used at least in 50 studies, if not more, and will probably be used in the future as well. And maybe not at Lund, but because of the reactions. But that is something that's. And speaking of these students,
before we go on, sorry, because I just realized we haven't really described what the problem was. So you had a jury looking at some photos.
Exactly.
Do you want to just tell the viewers maybe a bit about the photos?
So basically, the photos were from Facebook, and basically, in most cases, it was profile pictures. And they are, I haven't gone into, secret groups and all of that. These are all public. You don't even need a Facebook account to use these videos or pictures. All you need is an internet access. And so those are public in that sense. And it's also public in a legal sense, because we have in Sweden quite generous laws that regulate if something is public or not. It would actually even be possible for me to publish these pictures in the dissertation, like to the right you have an example of a beautiful picture, and then just to post the pictures. However, I do think that is over the ethical threshold, so I'm not going to do that, but the law allows me to do that, actually.
I see. Okay, I wanted to ask you more about that, because I think that's an important point to get forward. But just to bring it back, so you had the student lists of people who were enrolled in this program, is that right? And then you harvest the pictures from Facebook, just the profile pictures that were official. And then you use them for a jury to grade them. Basically, that's what the... Okay, and then some students have taken offense of... Oh, not offense. How would you articulate it?
Criticize or asked whether this is first, whether it's legal, and second, whether it's good research practice.
All right.
And that is... And in terms of legality, if we want to discuss that first, so in GDPR, there is regulations when you can use data for public data and data in general, and in order to be legal, you have to have a reason, basically, for why you're doing that. And in most cases, when you and I, as private citizens, use data, we would normally use consent as a legal ground. Yes. And that basically means that the person has agreed to this treatment. Yes. However, as a university, we are a government agency in Sweden. Yes. And that means that we don't have to use that ground. And we're actually not allowed to. I mean, we shouldn't use that ground. Okay. And we should actually use the ground that I've been using there, and that is public interest, that is called in GDPR. And by public interest, basically what is meant is that our society as a whole has decided that research is so important that we can use data without asking, basically. And that is the kind of legal framework that our interests in research are way more heavy in a sense than the rights of these to refuse.
Interesting.
And that is
interesting.
And that's our same rules in the entire EU, actually. So this is not something that's unique to Sweden. That's in the European Union law, basically.
I see. Okay, that's quite interesting, because I think a lot of people might not be aware of that.
Exactly.
They feel like maybe some, like, reproducing the pictures somehow would be illegal, or I don't think a lot of people are aware what happens when we put these pictures on social media.
Exactly.
So I think that's I see your point that you haven't really committed anything wrong. But why do you think this stirs such strong emotions in these students? Can you relate to it at all?
I can relate to that, and I think it has to do with that, with the fact that beauty is very kind of controversial in today's society. I mean, has been a lot of discussions, for instance, about, Victoria's Secret having all these, very attractive, models that are very beautiful, and then people say that, this kind of a body ideal that is very, very wrong in a sense, right? And that I would assume mainly girls are kind of, already from a young age, they are, everyone says that you have to be beautiful, you have to be attractive, and that kind of stirs up this controversy. But when you post pictures of yourself, they can be used in a research setting, but also in a commercial setting, for instance.
Yeah, sure.
And that is the kind of legal framework that guides.
So if I understand you correctly, are you saying that it's mostly females that have the problem with this study, and that it's not necessarily the results that the problem is, but just that their pictures have been used?
I would say that mainly females, but there are also male students, so I don't think that's kind of general, but maybe I would say that this whole beauty thing is more controversial for females, because females are rated differently than men, and we know from studies that men think that beauty in their female partners, if they're heterosexual, is way more important than what females think about their partners, right? And that is probably the reason.
So, sorry. So, how was that the reason? So, if a male,
like for heterosexuals, men think that the attractiveness of their partner is, or of females, then is very important, generally speaking. Okay. Whereas women don't care so much about men's beauty, and hence women are evaluated by their employers, by their bosses, friends, and so on, more based on beauty compared to males.
Yeah, okay.
And that is probably the reason.
So then it becomes like kind of a sensitive issue, especially if females want to be rated on maybe their skills or competence, rather than So that I can see that. So that you're saying then it's because of the controversy, or the sensitiveness of the subject. Sure. Would you say that's what you're?
Yes, I think that's kind of
the response. Okay, interesting. Because as I mentioned in the introduction as well, academic freedom has been considered so important in Sweden that we actually put it into law only recently, though, and the freedom of inquiry as a moral concept. But you've mentioned in an interview in Aftonbladet relating to this, you said that, I'll read it in Swedish and then I'll try to sum it up. So you say att forskare inte ska få undersöka kontroversiella saker. Det är smått obehagligt att man försöker tysta forskare på detta sättet. So essentially what you're saying is that there's a worry here, you sense a worry or something uncomfortable that people are trying to actually silence unwanted or uncomfortable or sensitive research. Do you want to develop this point further?
Yeah, sure. I mean, because there's been such a big of a controversy, and this is kind of a standard framework in the literature, right? So we use this setting using juries. There's nothing strange about that. The study has been peer-reviewed. It was approved by my supervisor. It was approved by the College of Professors at the department, and no one had kind of anything to say about this. And then all of a sudden you have, representatives of the university in interviews basically saying more or less between the lines that this is really unethical.
Yes.
And you also have this backlash and in the media, and a lot of the debate has been in the media as well, instead of people just asking me, hey, what was this and what reasons do you have for doing this study? Whereas now it has been a whole media discussion, and we know that it's very difficult to actually have an objective debate of these matters in the media, because these are difficult stuff for people to grasp, right? So that I think is very dangerous if you are criticized on very loose grounds, and you have 100 journalists calling you, and you have university management basically also saying that you're more or less a criminal, right? Which has been done here, and I think that's really dangerous for academic freedom.
So you first of all, if I hear you correctly, so you feel like this, it's almost like this story has gotten a life of its own in the media,
sure.
And the nuances get lost. And then, but you also raise an important thing there, this issue that also the university officials go out in public and make these statements. Do you feel? You said that you are made out to feel like a criminal.
Yeah.
Is it that serious?
Yeah, I mean,
it's gone that far?
I think so.
Yeah.
My boss said that if this had happened to any other PhD student at our department, they would have probably committed suicide at this point. And that is really, really, that is a disaster actually for academic freedom, because if you are, basically slaughtered in the media, which I was, and, you have this journalist trying to convince you that you have done something wrong, that is really, really bad, and that is not the working environment that we should have at university, and that is really, really bad. Okay,
since we're on the topic of university officials and their handling of the case, how do you think? Well, first of all, what's gone wrong? How should the case have been handled to begin with? Where do you feel like you've been, left behind or
so what is kind of remarkable is that no one from LTH, which was the faculty where this where these students came from, has actually been in contact with me. They have not been in contact with my supervisors or with my head of department. Instead, all of the communication has been done by media, and they have gone into the media and said that, I have, the principal of LTH said that, I have some questions about this study, right? But why do you post them in the media rather than asking me what is the legal framework and, what are the research ethics, right, behind this? And that is a very peculiar way of handling it, right? So you should actually go to the source, right, and not speculate in the media, because that would have made things much easier, and the students would also probably have been less, the reactions from the students would probably be less than
what it is now.
Well, exactly.
So do you so you feel like there's been some mail-handle or some wrongdoing here, which could have been avoided if they would have gone straight to you?
Exactly.
Was this something that you knew about as a PhD student?
No, I mean, I couldn't imagine that someone would actually go to the media and criticize without actually asking me first or my supervisors why and what, basically. And that is very strange, because I have been answering emails, of course, all of this time. My phone has been working properly, and it's, I mean, it's not so difficult to actually just call me. And now I kind of feel that they have something personal, and that they really want to stop this from being discussed. And I also think that another reason could actually be the fact that the study shows that there is a discrimination depending on beauty. I mean, this is not something that's unique to LTH. I mean, there's discrimination depending on beauty in all of our society. So I don't know why they are, very feel very offended by this, right? So I'm not actually blaming the students first and foremost. I'm blaming the LTH.
The faculty, yeah. But you could see why that would be a sensitive matter, right?
Sure, exactly. And then you would actually maybe, I mean, a normal reaction would maybe be to, study why, how can we fix this problem? Can we do assignments, exams more anonymous than they already are? Could we have some kind of courses in how you treat your students and your co-workers and so on? Could the students maybe do something and so on? So that would be the proper reaction. It's not a proper reaction to go in the media and to trash a PhD student. Basically.
Yeah, no,
that is not correct.
I hear you. Speaking of the anonymity that you mentioned, so you said in a TV reporting for SVT, the Swedish television network, the question was raised to you about how these exams are anonymous. Yeah. So how do you get these results to begin with? Yeah. Because you would have to have teacher interaction, and the teacher would have to know the students in able to make this discrimination. But so let's start there, right? You said that the teachers positively discriminated the female students in particular, but what do you say to this, that if the exams are anonymous, then how is this even a result?
Yeah, so basically there are two things. First, we have the courses where there's a lot of these anonymous exams. In those courses, we didn't even see this effect. Okay. So a kind of policy recommendation would be to have more anonymous exams and so on. Okay. But then there are courses where there is teacher-to-student interaction, even at this setting. And this is because you may have, for instance, you hand in group assignments and so on, and then you would hand them in with your name. And then if the student has, gotten to know the teacher somehow, it's much easier to actually discriminate in this way. And then it's also the case for Sweden that we don't really have an anonymous grading fully, whereas you can write your exam anonymously. When the grade is put in the system, then you will have to know the name of the student. So that also makes it possible to discriminate. And a third channel actually would be if that a student is on the line, kind of border between two grades. A student has, of course, the right to complain to the teacher, and it could be the case that teachers are more lenient, i.e. More likely to accept changes of grades upwards, and for students that are attractive. And I think that could also be a channel. So even though the exam might be written anonymously, if the student is on the border between two grades and he or she complains, then the teacher can give higher grades.
But in this case, it was she, right? It wouldn't be he or she. It would be she would get a higher grade, right?
Yeah, I mean, before the pandemic, both males and females received higher grades. So that is a very important aspect. And during the pandemic, the grades of attractive females declined, whereas the grades of attractive males remained higher. So now, because we're kind of back in the pre-pandemic mode, we actually have that both males and females receive higher grades. Yes. So this would be both he and she in this case.
Okay. Right. So the fact that these exams are not really anonymous is what you're saying, right?
Exactly.
Don't you think that's a bigger... Because my reaction when I heard this, my first reaction was, my goodness, this is a bigger problem than the pictures being used ethically. You know, I think
this is a
teachers
big
changing the grades discriminating in
sure.
this way,
Yeah.
I think is a bigger problem for LTH. What do you
Much bigger problem,
Yeah.
but that's why they don't want to talk about it.
Okay, because
it's kind of this, shooting the messenger kind of reaction, right? That it's me and my study that's the problem and not the results themselves. And however, I don't blame them, right? I mean, it's there is a lot of these things going on in society, and that's definitely not just at this school, and it's not only in the country of Sweden. It's a global issue. And it's very difficult to do something about it, because this is how we as humans are, right? When we see someone who's beautiful, we treat them differently than we.
But it's extraordinary, or I'm actually surprised, and I'm surprised to the level that you're agreeing that this is a problem, because I don't know how you do it at LTH, but for us to be able to do something like that here, when we correct the exams, we have anonymous exams too. We just recently started with it, and then the system, of course, converts it to the student's name, and then we have to put in the results into Ladoc, the system where we do it, and to knowingly change that grade, it's an extra step of being conscious about it. It's almost like it's not even implicit bias, but explicit bias.
But then we also saw that in those courses where there is a lot of teacher-student interaction, and where points are maybe given on other assignments and not just the exam, then we saw a much bigger effect. I mean, in courses where there were only these anonymous grading, then we had no statistically significant effect at all of beauty, right? So the more anonymous it is, the probably better to avoid this discrimination. However, there are always ways of bypassing this, and this, complaining about grades and then changing it upwards is such a way.
Yes. And of course, another factor that we haven't mentioned is that most of the professors, as I understood it, are male in these courses. But let's pretend for a moment, if you want to just play along, that the anonymity was working at LTH as it should, and that this effect still happened, that attractive females got lower grades during the pandemic. Do you see other reasons other than the discrimination of beauty? Do you see that maybe perhaps better looking girl, you should tell me.
Yeah, sure, exactly. It could be the case that better looking women, and maybe women in general, they felt worse during the pandemic for some reason. It could be that they have more open social networks, they have more friends and so on. When the pandemic hit, these friendship, it was much more difficult actually to hang out with your friends and so on spontaneously, meaning that for these students it could have a kind of a psychological effect that could explain the drop in grades. It's not only an issue of discrimination, I think. There could be other aspects as well, so it's not it is not clear cut. However, the results fit nicely in this discrimination literature, and I think that for future studies it could be important to look at if there are other aspects that could be important, because the pandemic obviously had a lot of impact on everyone's lives, and not just whether it was supposed to be online or not. It had lots of other negative impacts as well.
So that brings me nicely to the next thought that I had about this. Where do you go from here? So what's the next step in this kind of study? Like, what do you see? Do you see that we can learn things from your experience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, both in terms of research, but I do, however, think that it's a bit of a problem, because I think that not only PhD students, but also professors, associate professors and similar, who are doing similar studies on this kind of topic, will be more hesitant to publish them. I mean, maybe not publish, because that typically stays within academia, but to perform what we in Sweden call the third task of the universities, which is to reach out to the surrounding society. That would be much more difficult in the future. And I actually know that we have a professor at our department who's doing a similar study also with students. I don't know actually what he's investigating, but he has said that I will not probably go out in the media and talk about this because I know what the reactions could be. That is also really annoying and a big threat to the integrity of researchers and academic freedom generally.
Definitely. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I started this channel to begin with, just to have that public outreach parts fulfilled, and having in-depth conversations, actually hearing from the researcher himself. But so that's what I was worried about, because I was thinking, I thought maybe this would have an effect on people wanting to do this kind of research at all, to being hesitant to doing them. But you're saying it will be the third role, or the outreach part.
Because the thing is that we do so much research here. I mean, there are hundreds of economics journals that publish thousands of papers per year, and there are so many research papers published, and there's only a few of them that reach the public, kind of the public, right? And there are only maybe 0.1% of something, probably even smaller, that kind of reach the whole world, as the study has been doing. And you have to have a really interesting topic, and many people think that beauty and this kind of thing is really interesting, and it would be a shame if that stopped us from also spreading it out to the world, because the taxpayer needs to know what they're paying for, right? That is also kind of, for this kind of checks and balances thing, basically, right? Because people have the right to know what we are doing for their taxpayer money, and this kind of research is a part of what we do, and it's important that they know that.
Definitely. Do you think that because of that reason, we should also maybe listen to the criticism a bit more? Like, do we need to, maybe different from, let's say, another commercial business that use some method? I don't know why they should be held differently accountable, but do you think we have a bigger responsibility ethically, given that we are taxpayer funded?
Yes, I do. And we also have kind of our ethical standards, and Sweden is one of the few countries where ethics and research ethics is codified in law, and we know quite clearly, when do you have to have an ethics approval and so on. And I think that we should continue with that, but I think it's really difficult if we end up in this situation again. So I hope that the university has also learned a few things about the handling of this, because I don't think that I think that no other PhD student deserves this kind of treatment, actually, what I've been subject to. And there's also another issue here, because we, as PhD students, we don't have, and postdocs as well, we don't have any permanent positions. A professor can do basically whatever he or she wants, and there will be no consequences, more or less, because they have tenure, and they can't really be fired. Whereas for us PhD students and postdocs, it's not really that easy. So there is this because we often work on short-term contracts, and too much negative attention could have a detrimental effect on our careers, and our chances of establishing ourselves in academia.
Okay, so do you see that now? Do you feel that? Are you scared of that right now for yourself?
I mean, I am actually, because I've had a lot of really good comments from researchers who said that this is really I've been handling this well, and what the university has done has been terrible, and but I'm also, of course, I guess that there are also some researchers who also think that this is a bit unethical, and that could also have an negative effect on my career. But we will see. I have no idea whether it will be positive or it will be negative overall. We'll see. That would be interesting to see.
That would be interesting to see, indeed. Yes, definitely. So, given that you've had so much media attention on this paper, and you said almost like it's taken a life of its own.
Sure.
What do you want the message to be from? Because, like you said, the conclusions have been many,
sure.
And the university has also, with the ethical aspect of it and such. What do you want the takeaway message to be from your study?
I think that the kind of takeaway message, kind of in terms of the academic results of it, I think that we need to work more on this discrimination, and that it can be both consequence of discrimination. It could be other aspects. It could be the productivity aspect. It could be, that some students fared worse during the pandemic because of, this socioeconomic background, or they just felt worse or something. And this is quite a short article, about 2,000 words. I don't put a lot of discussion about mechanisms. Yeah. But I do think that the takeaway is that, I am not pointing fingers at LTH or anyone else. I think that this is a problem that exists all over the world. Mm. And in terms of the post-publication debate, I think it's very important to know that this is really terrible for the future of academia, basically, if it continues, because we have a debate here in academia, and we know about research ethics, we know about how to publish a good study methodologically. We have seminars, we have conferences, this work has been presented. When that peer review is done, we have to put any methodological questions to rest and let us, as academics, do what we do best, and that is write papers and disseminate papers.
Yeah, interesting. That would have been an awesome note to end on.
Yeah, sure.
But another question came to my mind, if you don't mind me asking you one more. Yeah. Well, now that I have you here. Yeah. Because you said, okay, we have the methodological stuff in place, and we can move on. But what do you want to do now in terms of maybe if somebody wants to replicate the study? Yeah. Because we know that's been a problem for psychology, right? They had the replication crisis, reproducibility crisis not long ago. And how would you do in a study like this?
Yeah, I mean, of course, in terms of replication, all the code is available. You can, of course, access it if you like. If you want to do it again under another setting, you would have to find a setting where you all of a sudden change modes of instruction. You could, for instance, do that by doing a lottery where some students are allocated to study online, and other students are allocated to study on campus with the same teacher, and then you will see if there's a bias there. That could be a way of doing it. There are other ways as well, but the good is you would have to find either a natural experiment setting or some kind of field experiment where you look at these things. So I think it's relatively easy to replicate, but you also have to be honest why you're doing it.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a good note to end on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having this conversation and giving us some insight to how the university really works here in Sweden.
Sure.
And this whole controversy really that's surrounded.
Yeah, sure.
And good luck to you. I wish you the best.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Adrian.